Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Happy New Year. This is the first show of 2021 for the Farming Podcast brought to you by Private Property. My name is Mbali Nwoko and I'm your host. Thank you so much for joining us. I know we've kind of changed things up a little. We used to have the show during the day. However, I felt, the entire team just felt it best that, we move the time slots a bit so that some of you that are working throughout the day can obviously benefit greatly from the show and the discussions and the guests we're bringing and to ask questions live. So I definitely do still encourage you to ask questions during our conversation today with this guest. And before I introduce our guest this evening, I just want to tell you about a competition that we're running as Private Property. It's called the Sherlock Holmes competition, where each week we will be giving away a riddle, and you could find this riddle on our property site, Private Property, and every single week we'll announce winners who would greatly benefit from a cash prize to the value of 5,000 Rand. So definitely take advantage of this. Once again, you'll find the riddle leading to different properties on our site. So please do visit our site and follow our social media pages, whether you're watching us from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. So please just connect with us on our socials, and as we will announce different guests every week who's won. And yeah, please, I definitely encourage you to take part of our competition. So I just want to introduce our guest today, someone that I've known just briefly and has become a good friend and has a wealth of knowledge, especially from a financial or investment expertise. And today we're going to be discussing investment in agriculture. So not necessarily as a farmer, but you may have an agribusiness or be part in the value chain in agriculture. So we're going to discuss quite broadly about investment and different financing options to run your farm or your agribusiness, and really what is the economy looking like, especially from an agricultural outlook where funding and finance is concerned. So today I am joined by Zaheer Dindar, who's the managing partner of BeyondSoil. Zaheer, thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Bali. Thanks for having me.
Great, thanks. Thank you so much for making the time. But I know you personally, but I just want you to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about BeyondSoil. And maybe after that introduction, you could just give us a brief synopsis of, what is the current climate where financing or investment is involved in the agricultural landscape in South Africa. So if you could give us some insight in that, yeah.
Very cool. You give me the opportunity to just say all sorts of things that might take up the entire half an hour. I really do enjoy to speak. So Zaheer, I have a background in applied mathematics, in AI actually. My master's was in AI applied to derivative pricing, what seems like several decades ago. Background in banking. I worked in banking in London for a while, and then came to South Africa, where I worked in consulting, in strategy consulting for the bulk of my career. At some point, actually, just in between the two, worth knowing, I guess, is that I attempted an tech startup in 2010 that failed, miserably. That was just before I started in consulting. And later on, after consulting, I worked at the Land Bank in the structured finance team, also in the strategy team for a while. And then I went to Ethiopia and joined a phenomenal team over there, the analytics team, which is part of the Ethiopian Agricultural Transformation Agency. And the agency is really tasked with something quite bold, which is to change the lives of smallholder farmers. The analytics team within the broader agency are really the thinkers, I would say. And we did all sorts of things there, from sort of national strategies and policy to very specific things like how is it that we get agricultural inputs to farmers in very remote areas. These are all sorts of problems that we've tackled as a team. And I worked with truly phenomenal largely because COVID prevented us to do so, prevented us from starting earlier. So BeyondSoil, before telling you what it is that we do, I'll just tell you about us. I think BeyondSoil, we have the audacity, I guess, to dream of change. And I mean this humbly. After not only a rough 2020, but a rough several years off the back of rough several decades. South African agriculture, or food rather, has significant potential. We have great links, albeit by a few, into stable European markets, and also established links into the continent, which will be high growth because of population growth and urbanization growth. For all of our challenges of policy paralysis and underinvestment, our infrastructure is actually pretty good. We also have phenomenal and inspiring entrepreneurs. So we're quite positive that the South African food story will be a very good one for the next couple of decades. So BeyondSoil aims to be part of that growth story. We want to grow with small businesses and grow with them to commercial level. We do this via our Agri-Business Builder, which is a venture builder, or to put it more directly, we co-build and we co-invest in businesses and stick with them through the tough times and hopefully through the good times and their growth to commercialization. Right? We are, I think, Bali, I'm hoping you know this, but we are perfectionists, not in appearance clearly, but we aim to create internationally competitive businesses that are fantastic. And I guess that's it. And I guess we hope to know the triumph of change and transformation, or failure, having had the audacity to change the status quo. And that's us. Mbali asked me to chat a bit about ag and the funding landscape. And I guess the reality is for most folks within the ag small business space, it's tough. And I want to talk about the different sort of funding options that are currently available to agribusinesses, to give a bit of context into why it's so tough and why, especially if you're small, it's incredibly difficult and something's got to give. It has to change, but right now we're in a really difficult space. Most agribusinesses are funded by debt. We have retail banks, development banks, there are co-ops that provide funding. We have specialist banks like the Land Bank and a couple of commodity-specific banks. And they largely, all of them fund debt. The big four are known to be incredibly risk-averse. They tend to provide financial products primarily to established commercial entities, and they have the normal product suite which is short-term loans, overdraft, medium-term loans, and long-term for sort of asset acquisition, etc. The development banks do have, so not very suitable to small businesses at all. And this is something that the retail banks certainly need to address, because they have a lot more clout and can have a lot greater impact in the sector, but they're too risk averse and probably need to modernize it. Development banks do have some interesting and viable products on paper, which covers startup capital, expansion capital, but they're not the quickest. And they tend to fund brownfield projects mostly, so greenfield projects are less common. The co-ops, the great thing about the co-ops is that they have commodity-specific expertise, and therefore the ability to reduce, risk around production for that particular commodity. But they do mainly short-term funding, so they don't really help new entrants. Specialist banks like the Land Bank are really stuck between a rock and a hard place. They really have a challenging mandate and very little support from government and the sector to achieve that mandate. They need to raise capital from the open markets largely, and therefore, because of that, can only really focus on commercial entities and traditional security-backed products. They, like all other banks, are faced with one fundamental issue, and this is something that I guess we all need to realize. The fundamental issue is the fee versus volume issue. It takes just about the same time for a banker, for somebody who's structuring a deal, structuring some kind of financing, It takes about the same time to structure a project or deal that's worth 500,000 Rand as it does that's another project that's worth 50 million Rand. So it doesn't make economic sense for them to focus on small businesses. And this is just the tough reality. They should absolutely change, and they should think about new ways of doing things. But couple this with the fact that they desperately need to modernize means that it's really tough for all of these banks. And maybe I'm being too lenient on them. They should absolutely do more. But it's even more difficult for small businesses within the agriculture space. And I guess that's the tough reality that we have to face. That it's just really, really difficult, right? So from a farmer's point of view, from a small business point of view, you kind of need to, focus during the day on production and not sleep at night, to reach out to people, be it retailers. I mean, in principle, you need to structure your business for the different financial products that are available, but you kind of have to work really hard and reach out to anybody, be it neighbors, etc., to kind of make it happen.
Yeah, because I was going to ask that, Zaheer. Typically we'd have to approach banks because they're the ones that have money, they have the expertise and the professionals behind the scenes that really understand agriculture, or they should have, that understand agriculture, the different models, the landscape, commodity prices, imports and exports, etc. So it's essentially you want to approach a bank. Whereas I was going to ask a question as to if banks are not the ones or not the entities or institutions that typically farmers or any agri-preneurs can approach, where do we turn to? Where do entrepreneurs in the agricultural space then turn to if it's not the traditional banking system?
I would think so. I would say that it really depends on what it is that you have. You can approach banks, absolutely, and you should. But know that banks tend to focus on businesses, or tend to fund businesses that have assets. So if you're a very small business and you're a new business, it's going to be really tough to back you because you need assets. And they typically work on a 60-40 kind of ratio. They want 40% equity and they'll provide 60% in debt, and that's really tough for lots of small businesses. Although some businesses do have access to land and pre-existing infrastructure, and then it's perfectly acceptable to chat to a bank. I think for most folks who are quite small, you need to chat to retailers. You need to chat to sort of neighboring farms and get production going by any means. Retailers, off-takers, some of the larger food groups all have various programs that support smaller businesses. And I know it's a bit of a to swallow, but you kind of do have to put everything into funding your business and keeping it afloat until you have a little bit of traction and proof of the concept, whatever it is that you're doing, before you can then start attracting, more capital, growth capital, for example. And of course, reach out to BeyondSoil for all types of support.
Right. So let's break down your support from BeyondSoil. A farmer could be listening, an agripreneur, whether they're importer and exporter of food products, perishable food or perishable goods or non-perishable goods, and they're listening to you. And what do they come to BeyondSoil for? What services are you providing the farmers or agripreneurs or entrepreneurs rather in the agricultural space? Yeah.
So don't come to BeyondSoil for technical expertise, but come to us for everything else, right? I think folks in the agriculture space and the food space, entrepreneurs in general, know their field incredibly well. They know exactly what they're doing most of the time. You have phenomenal farmers and phenomenal processes out there, and what they probably need is the language of funding and how it is to structure their business for future success. And that's why they would approach us. Right? So we've worked within corporations as consultants and bankers for a long time, and we've provided the same kind of support to the likes of Sasol and the likes of even the banks that we speak about, and mining entities, etc. And what we realize is that actually small businesses require those skills more so than all of these corporates. And that's pretty much what we do. So we've put the model, we've turned the model upside down, and we provide these kind of strategic support, strategic services and support to small businesses. So come to us if you are ambitious, if you want to grow, if you want to take on, sort of tiger brands in the future, if you want to be the next Rugani, and you have, lofty ambitions. However, you sort of struggle with how it is that you get there. You struggle with the building blocks to get there. Come and have a chat to us.
So it's basically the strategic direction, and then taking the vision in the next 5 to 10 years, but breaking it down in small steps per quarter, per season, every year, etc., and just reaching certain milestones to get there.
I think the challenges of small businesses are vast, and absolutely those could be challenges that small businesses face. The idea of co-creation means that we sit in the same room largely over a period of 9 months or several years, and solve every single problem that we face. It could be an operational issue. It could be, oh gosh, we aren't getting the same kind of numbers today as we did yesterday. Do we have the right labor force in place? Oh gosh, we're growing steadily. As an owner, I can no longer, do all of these things at once. I need to start thinking a bit more strategically. How do I hire a farm manager? So it really tackles the co-creation process, really tackles every single thing that an entrepreneur can have. Absolutely, strategy, structuring financials, looking after your management accounts are big parts of that. But yes.
So let's talk about that. You spoke about management accounts. What are some of the most critical items or things that an entrepreneur in the agri space needs to have in place prior to having that discussion with a potential investor?
Yeah, I think it might sound fairly rudimentary, but you kind of need to understand your business, right? You need to have recorded everything in fairly meticulous detail. Funders, be it equity funders or debt funders, all speak very similar languages. The language of financials. Obviously, you look at the skill and enthusiasm and talent in the individual, and that counts a lot. But the common language, I would say, is what do the financials look like? What are your ambitions? Are these ambitions realistic? So when it comes to financials, you do need to record everything. Record all of the revenues that come in, record all of your costs. And I would say a crucial piece of advice, and I know it's really challenging for small businesses, a crucial piece of advice would be to separate your personal life and your personal goals from that of the business. And you do that so that you can actually look at and tell a story about your business and whether it has a viable future or not. So just make sure that if you're paying yourself a salary, it is on the books, and try as much as possible to keep it separate. The one real challenge I would say for small businesses is that you need cash. You need survival. You need to pay all sorts of bills and concentrate on the next sort of harvest cycle. So it's really tough to think about all of those things which are at that moment far more important than actually collecting the data and making sure that your sort of financial house is in order. But I would say largely document everything, even if you're not the one that's going to be recording it in a model, or you're not the one that's going to be recording it in the financials. Try and document everything as much as possible, and get the help, with an accountant, with folks that understand financials, so that you can start thinking about whether what it is that you're doing actually makes sense or not.
I like the fact that when I speak to individuals like yourself, you always mention that business owners must separate their personal lives from their business life. And for one that has obviously gone through that whole investment discussions in the past, I think in the second quarter, in the second half of last year, it's sometimes difficult, Zaheer, to be quite honest, as an entrepreneur, simply because you might see that, cash flow in the business is slightly dwindling, and then you've got funds in your personal capacity, and you might have to borrow the business that money, but then you forget to report that, and then, it's your baby, it's your business, you want it to see and flourish. And then when you start to have the investor conversation, they'll ask you, how have you been living? How have you been surviving? You're not paying yourself a salary, and you're like, I'm obviously not paying myself a salary because I'm putting every single cent that I have, whether it's from the business capacity or personal capacity, to try and grow this business. Because like you said in the beginning, times are tough. You have to do whatever it is that's necessary to grow your business. And sometimes to have this clear, defined line between personal and business finances, etc., is quite difficult. And I know for myself and some entrepreneurs that I know, we often find ourselves having to really pour in a lot from our personal expenses into the business, sacrificing salaries. And then by the time we speak to BeyondSoil and you do your due diligence on our businesses, it's like you're not investment ready. You haven't been recording. Like, how do we get ourselves from this situation? Because if we don't fund our businesses as entrepreneurs, who will?
That's a phenomenal point, and you're quite right. Cash is the fundamental issue that small businesses face. I think you articulated it quite well in that is the solution. I think the solution is to know. The solution is to have recorded it. We do need to use the cash that's available to pay the bills that need to be paid. But if we're aware of where it comes from, folks like us and yourself, once you've established your business and you start thinking a bit more strategically, you'll realize that actually to make this a bit more viable, maybe self-funding is not better than knocking on the retailer's door and say, hey, you know what, can you provide me a production loan? And in that sense, you reduce your sort of personal financial risk and create a healthier business. Again, easier said than done. It's always great to speak to colleagues. It's always good to speak to fellow entrepreneurs, the neighboring farm, and try and leverage everyone's expertise. The reality is small businesses need to survive. They need cash, but try and document it in a way that you can explain it sort of later on. And even if it's just to do the analysis yourself and say, oh, actually, you know what, in future, as I grow, I'll do it a bit differently. Or maybe that's the right way of doing it.
Before I ask you the next question, is that I just want to encourage everybody that's watching this evening to please feel free to comment, ask Zaheer or myself any questions, and if there's something that's quite important that you want Zaheer to maybe address, please do engage with us on all our social media platforms, wherever you're watching this live. So please don't be quiet, because this is for you. This information is for you. Just moving on, Zaheer, and you mentioned something about the banks, right? And how they assess agribusinesses or farms, etc. And that some of that, part of that assessment is that they look at things like assets. Now, what would your advice be for an entrepreneur? Because sometimes it's easier to just run your business with the model of not having to own everything, and this is the reason why your Ubers and your Airbnbs exist. So, for example, you're saying leverage off our neighbors, so it could be borrowing a neighbor's tractor for that hour, I don't know, using an implement or etc., fertilizers, whatever the case might be. So it's not physically owning assets, but trying to leverage and make sure that you ease your capital expenditure on a monthly basis. But now, when we're listening to you, and most investors and bankers obviously say that, it's like, we want to look at your balance sheet, and how do you run a business, let's say between day 1 to year 5, trying to build a business asset worthy, but at the same time, maybe your strategy in the business is to not own assets, because sometimes having too many overheads could lead to crippling your liquidity. So how do we manage those two?
I guess the tough bit is, the reality is that the banks use their models of assessing things. rules, right? And we're not going to be able to change them just because our business has a different strategy, rightly or wrongly. Unfortunately, when we want to raise debt capital from these folks, we're going to have to play by their rules. There are a couple of banks who they were sort of ag-specific banks in the past that spoke about off-balance sheet funding. It's entirely possible for banks to do that. They just need to apply themselves a bit more and look at their risk models in a slightly different way, right? The fundamental risk in banking is production risk. However, production risk can be greatly reduced with all sorts of support mechanisms, right? The right kind of technical assistance, the right kind of guarantees in place, the right kind of insurance products. So in principle, their risk can be mitigated massively, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, purely the asset-based loans that they have right now, or security-backed loans that they have right now. How the broader question, which is how does one survive 5 years? Gosh, you don't sleep. You know what I mean? It's tough for entrepreneurs, and I think the challenge, and this is where I think South Africa has a lot to learn, and the sector in particular has a lot to learn. The private sector in particular, I think, needs to step up, right? What you find across the globe, especially in markets like the US or rather in the tech space, what you have is so much money being invested into ideas, and they are free, and that's free money, right? So much money invested in new ideas. Just a huge amount of capital that goes into ideas, and it's really they're betting that one of 50 investments will make it. But what that means really is that there's an ecosystem where that provides huge amounts of support and patience, and within that kind of ecosystem, our businesses are allowed to thrive. So South Africa actually needs the private sector as well as the public sector, but largely the private sector to step up and fill that gap. Right now, banks aren't stepping up. The banks are risk averse. I think the private sector kind of needs to play that role and say, hey, you know what? We need to grow. Growth within the sector, where only 4% or 4.5% of the sector is black owned. Growth is incredibly important. Transformation is absolutely important and absolutely urgent. It needs to happen now. Both of those things need to happen now. And the private sector kind of needs to step up and provide the patient capital to grow the sector. As I mentioned right at the start, we are incredibly bullish about the sector because we believe that we could, contribute vastly to our economy by exporting to the continent. But we really do need a bit of cash, and right now the private sector are the only folks that can really, step up.
And in your introductions, Zaheer, you mentioned that you're all about food systems, etc. Making sure that within the South African context we are food secure and helping businesses that pretty much share the same value. Now, I just want to know, with your experience and obviously having worked outside South Africa, you mentioned that you were part of a transformation agency in Ethiopia. What is the global economy perspective or views when it comes to investment in the food space? And what is the appetite currently? Is it more into the primary production? Because again, when you look at the African continent, there's many African countries that really cannot be self-sufficient when it comes to producing their own food. So is the investment moving more to primary agriculture, or in machinery, or in equipment, or in along the value chain, retail, agri-processing? Because the sentiment here in South Africa is that everybody wants to invest in processes, and primary production is really not the appetite. So having worked outside our South African borders, what is the global, I suppose, perception and appetite for investment in agriculture? Where is it really directed towards?
Yeah, I think it really differs. Yeah, primary production is certainly not the flavor of the market in South Africa, which is quite short-sighted, obviously, because we can really benefit from the growth potential and the basic jobs. Primary production can be quite labor absorptive, especially for basic jobs. I think think some of the sorts of international trends that are noteworthy is that, and it's sort of geopolitical issues, but folks in the Middle East are really gearing themselves towards primary production. They don't have the kind of land that make them food secure, so they are making huge amounts of investments in primary production across the continent. I think what the other things that you find across the continent, East and West Africa, is that there are really interesting tech models that, amazing entrepreneurs looking at fintech, especially in new ways to get primary agriculture going in a private sense. There are all sorts of development agencies working across the continent, very, very much focused on primary production and food security. I think the big thinkers across the world, or folks that know that we're going to face a crisis in a couple of decades from now, have really started to invest in agriculture in a big way. South Africa definitely lags behind in that respect.
Wow. So I think just to sum up our conversation, what would you say would be your closing comments, especially when it comes to agriculture and investment? So because I myself, as well as many other farmers, we always get questions from other aspirant farmers saying, "Hi, Mbali, I'm interested in farming. Where do I get funding?" There's general perception that funding is just easy to come by, maybe because I take a certain employment equity quota, whether I'm black, young, female, under 35, or whatever the case might be, or previously disadvantaged, or I'm in the rural area. That's generally the sentiment. People just say, "I want to farm, but where do I get funding?" So just as a closing, how can you sum up this whole funding conversation and just maybe educating people to say, is funding easy to come by? Where should they look? Who should they approach? Whether it's retail banks, development banks, other state-owned enterprises that really have an interest in agriculture, over and above just friends and family, and maybe just give us an insight based on certain businesses that you've worked with within BeyondSoil in terms of what is the outlook for 2021 for BeyondSoil, and just the projects that you guys are working on and what you hope for them.
Yeah, quite a lot to cover in summary. I would say for small businesses, to be honest, we tend to work with not the very smallest businesses. We tend to work with businesses that are already established, that have some kind of track record. So I'm not really familiar with very, very new entrants into the sector. But for the rest of the folks, there are funding products available at the banks if you fit the criteria. For the rest, you really do need to, I guess my suggestion or my advice would be to put in the building blocks, plot by plot, grow steadily, invest, try and reinvest all of your capital back into it, and do that steadily over a period of time. And Mbali, I think you know this really well. If you do that consistently for a period of 2 years, you not only understand the business of farming really intimately, you are then bankable as an entrepreneur. So I think that would be the advice to newer entrants. I guess the appeal really would be to folks who have access to a bit more cash, the banks especially, to really look at your models and answer the call. Right? We need phenomenal growth, and we need patient capital in the sector, to put sort of rocket fuel into that growth. When it comes to BeyondSoil, our ambition for this would be our second 6 months, or for the year ahead would be a year and a half into our business. We hope to have about 10 businesses within our agribusiness builder, and yes, start structuring them and getting them ready for commercialization.
Oh, awesome. So wishing you all the best with BeyondSoil, and I know that especially now with our tough economic climate, a lot of entrepreneurs need some help, some support, a second and third and fourth brain, just to really strengthen our businesses through this tough year that I still feel like we're going to still have, because, you know, the global pandemic is still here, and it doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. So, I really hope you all the best, and that I have no doubt that the businesses that you're working with will derive great value from your insights, your network, and your knowledge. So thank you so much, Zaheer, for joining us.
Thanks for your time, Bali.
Awesome. Thank you. That's it. That was Zaheer Dindar, who is the managing partner of BeyondSoil. And BeyondSoil works with entrepreneurs in the agricultural space. You don't necessarily have to be a farmer, a processor, but you could have an interest in the food space as well, importing, exporting, buying and selling fresh produce, livestock, whatever you name it. Sorry about that. So basically what they will assist you in is, first, you have to be an existing business and have to be operating, have some sort of track record to show that, you know, you've showed certain profits or losses, and really substantiate those losses. And then furthermore, they will assist you with your business processes, your operations. They will dive in and really give an overview analysis of how you're running a business as an entrepreneur. They want to understand your direction or your goals as a business owner in the next 5 to 10 years, and they will try help you with achieving those goals, and making sure that your strategy is aligned with your goals and you are on par with growing your business and making it a profitable one, because, you know, farming can be quite intensive and very expensive. So everybody wants profits at the end of the day. And they will assist with non-financial services, as well as, I think, maybe linking you to the right partners that you should be having a conversation with when it comes to seeking finance or investment for your business. But thank you so much for joining me this evening. I hope you had a great time listening to Zaheer and all the insights he had to share with us today. And I still definitely encourage everybody to constantly, please just engage with us during our conversations, really challenge the guests, because that's what we want. We want you to get the most value out of this conversation, and ensure that, post the live, you have somewhat of an idea of the agriculture industry, or have insights to your business that you could take forth. And so please join me on Thursday, once again, at 8 o'clock, where I will be joined by another guest. But I just want to encourage you to just keep following the private property social media pages and keep watching our lives. Tomorrow we have Uzama with her 7 o'clock time slot with the private property daily live podcast. And also we have SD tomorrow at 7:45 with the first time home buyer show. So please stay with us every week and every weekday as we bring you information with regards to farming, buying your first property, and anything you need to know within the property space. So please join me again on Thursday at 8 o'clock, where I'll be joined by another guest. Otherwise, stay home and stay safe. Thank you.
I'm Rick Nedling. I'm an Olympic gold medalist and shareholder and marketing director of Val Estate, which recently acquired Pearl Valley Estate. I've been living in the beautiful Paul Franschhoek Valley for the last 5 years. We are situated right in the heart of the Cape Winelands. Security is our number one priority, and it's something we work on every day. And this has earned us the reputation of being the safest estate in Africa. The lifestyle that this area has to offer truly is country living at its best. We're just 5 minutes away from the historic town of Paarl. Paarl really is an incredible area to explore, with little gems like the Spice Route and Fairview Farms. But the biggest attraction is the excellent schools. Franschhoek, on the other hand, is a major international tourist destination, and also known as the culinary capital of South Africa, with a diverse offering for every palate and occasion. Our recent acquisition of Pearl Valley is a major game changer for us. Our residents can now enjoy a wide range of amenities unmatched anywhere else in the world. There's the world-famous Jack Nicklaus signature golf course, which is consistently ranked among the top golf courses in South Africa, and there are some beautiful properties on the course. Val really is the ideal family environment. We also cater to equestrian lovers with facilities on offer for every discipline, from the 2 Hurlingham Standard Polo Fields to our state-of-the-art equestrian centers and miles of trails. Our horses live in paradise too. Val has its own wine farm and cellars, producing award-winning wines which every resident can be proud of. I've been blessed to travel the world, but this is the place I come home to. I'm sure you can see why we call it the Valley of Life. And this is my neighborhood.